morning. It's good to be back. It's good to be with you all. My name is Nathan Black. I'm Sutter County Auditor-Controller, and we're here to have a conversation this morning about some exciting things going on in our community and some cautionary tales about the ongoing public pension, I'm going to call it crisis, and I think you'll agree with that word as we work through some of the details. So what I haven't been on the radio with Andy for about 108 days, to be pretty specific. And the reason why I know that exactly at 108 or so days, you'll come to find in a moment. But one of the things that I would talk about back then was, where's our federal debt at? And so we're going to be talking about some debts, some CalPERS debts, some federal debts, some state debts. And I just want to be real clear, this isn't my most favorite topic to talk about. It's pretty scary, and it can be, a quote negative sort of thing to talk about, but that's okay. What has to be done is truth has to be, outed, and we have to, if we're not going to talk about it, we can't resolve these massive problems. And I think, again, you'll agree that massive and crisis are appropriate words to use here. So back about 108, 105 days ago, because when we're talking these big numbers, we can estimate a bit here, but we were at a 20 trillion 534 billion national debt. 20 trillion 534 billion, and then another 9 zeros. Now we're at 20 trillion 874 billion. So that's approximately 340 billion increase. And what that amounts to is about 3.3 billion per day that we've been increasing since we last spoke. Wow. And if you want to think of that per second, that's somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000 per second. And the reason why that's a pretty big range, 10 to 30, is the debt doesn't always increase in the same fashion. That is that at times we have a pretty steady 10,000 per second, and then other times we'll have big jumps and leaps because they make significant transfers, especially around the end of the year. So that's just huge to me. Billions of dollars a day we're going into further debt. So where does our state debt fall on all of that? California, we lead the nation, unfortunately. $426 billion of state debt. Okay, so we're talking huge numbers, big deal, and at some point, these things are going to come to a head. And so we need to be cognizant of that, and then thoughtful and encourage our political figures, our decision makers, our legislators to address this in a real way. So, and remember, this is a bipartisan problem. And as I explained months ago, whether this is popular or not, it doesn't matter to me. But beginning just in 2000 with President Bush, he started off with a federal balance sheet of $5.5 trillion of debt. When he left office 8 years later, he had pushed us up to $10.5 trillion. So that was a $5 trillion increase with President Bush in the 2000s. So he doubled our debt. And then President Obama came in and did one better and nearly doubled that again and took us from that 10.5 trillion he began with to 19. So that growth in debt is terrifying, and it should concern every American. And it's a concern to me that it's not talked about all the time. Some pundits talk about it, and I applaud them, and I appreciate what they're doing, but not enough. And this is by far the biggest existential crisis we have before us or in the future. We've got to address these financial problems. We have to. More accountants, less attorneys is what I say. So what about CalPERS debt? What's going on with that? And there was Andy reached out to me because there was a pretty interesting article that came out recently from Zero Hedge, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, I just wanted to kind of lay out where Yuba County and Sutter County are at. So as I said, I'm Sutter County Auditor-Controller. I'm the CPA for all 5 districts of the county is what I think of myself as. So I'm there to monitor from an accounting and finance standpoint the condition of the county. I also have specific regulatory. I'm an enforcement officer, right? So I look at California government code and any other statutes, and I enforce the law, in a financial context in my department. That's my job. Well, in addition to those specific statutory requirements and responsibilities, I also consider myself to be, or this position to be, maybe a clarion call for, for these other really big financial issues. And the elephant in the room, and the elephant that's been in the room for quite some time, is always the pension debt. In other counties, they also are struggling with what's called OPEB, other post-employment benefits, which is generally speaking retiree health care, so health care that's provided to employees that have retired. But for Yuba Sutter County, again, by far pension debt rules the day as the biggest concern. So as a percentage of assets to the total liabilities, which we call funded status, Yuba County is 66.2% funded. So again, what that means is 100% in this context represents the debt estimate, or the total liabilities as prepared and evaluated by the actuaries. So 66.2 means that Yuba County has put forth cash and assets down at CalPERS representing 66.2% of the total that they need. So they're underfunded significantly, right? 33.8%. Sutter County is just slightly better at 68.7%. And these figures, by the way, are from last June 30, 17. And there's even a delay in that. So in some ways, they're actually from 2016. But that's just the way that the slowness of these figures come out from CalPERS. So Yuba County 66, Sutter County 68, close to 69. CalPERS as a whole, 68%. So CalPERS, all employers that have money with CalPERS, in total 68% funded. So there's 32% underfunded, and that translates into unfunded pension liability that exists at CalPERS. And you say, okay, well, what's that mean? I guess CalPERS is getting a D, right? They're in the 60s. Well, yes, that actually is probably not a terribly inaccurate scoring of D. But the problem with D is that you're darn close to F, and F being failure here. So, and this is kind of a segue into the article. So let's first state the article. So if anybody's wanting to follow along, it's zerohedge.com, zerohedge.com, and this was an article by his name is Tyler Durden, although I believe that is just the name he uses, not his own name, Tyler Durden from the great movie Fight Club. So article is entitled, CalPERS is near insolvency. It needs a bailout soon. And that's the title there is an admission by former CalPERS board member and state controller Steve Wesley. So to begin, the article starts with David Hunt, CEO of $1.2 trillion asset manager company or investment company, PGIM. And he said, ignore the volatility spike that we encountered in early February. Don't worry about that. That's not the big issue here as far as the volatility, the big swing downward that was mostly temporary in the market that occurred in early February. Ignore that, he says. The real financial time bomb was and remains public pensions, end quote. So let's talk deeper about these public pensions. And of course, obviously, we're going to focus on CalPERS since we're in California, and it's the largest in the country. New York is the second largest, by the way, but we've got them beat by about $70 billion of debt. So Moving on, in a brief discussion, wondering what municipalities and states will do when local tax revenues decline and unemployment worsens, David Hunt, the CEO, said, "We're worried about these pension obligations." So, in other words, the next downturn could be literally the death knell of CalPERS. And that in and of that statement right there is a huge statement, very, very huge ramifications. And I think a lot of folks, they want to say, "Oh, come on, you can't you can't be serious, or that stuff won't happen." Well, that's often what people say until it does happen, right? What about this is getting us so close to the death knell or the edge of the cliff? Well, it's the fact that we're at 68% funded, CalPERS as a whole. So when we look back to the the late 2000s, when that downturn came in the 07-08 timeframe, that was a 30% drop in the asset value at CalPERS. 30%, huge. Think about what a 30% drop in the asset figures would be today if that same downturn occurred. And, just kind of, I haven't crunched this number yet, but if you just take 30% of 68%, the funded status, that's going to get us darn close to 50%. And I don't even have a calculator, but I'm sure that works out to close to that. So once a lot of actuaries and folks that are highly educated on this, they say when you get to or below 50%, that is the death spiral, because it's too difficult for employers to contribute their way out of it, because the only backstop to these huge declines in asset values because of these huge losses in the market is the taxpayers and the employers that participate at CalPERS. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room, in other words. Now, the last return was fair at I believe 11.2% last year. We'll see how it goes this year. But we literally need that 11.2% or those significant rates of returns for a long time. Now, another big aspect of this article was the fact that the amortization policy is changing at CalPERS. And they build it as a relatively small change. These are the weeds that I think most people aren't familiar with. So what I mean is this is the kinds of stuff that goes on down there that gets very little airplay or discussion or consideration by the vast majority of the populace, because it's there's some complexities to it, and there truly is. Amortization policy is a really interesting but complex area. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. We'll see how deep we get into it. But what it is, in short, is it's a way to smooth out changes and smooth out, say, big investment losses or gains. And so the smoothing means that they don't want to, if you have this huge loss in a particular year, what they do is they take that loss in, meaning they recognize the loss, not all in the year that the loss was incurred. So again, like in 07-08, that 30% drop, they actually didn't even realize that loss for purposes of how much money they made employers contribute in the following or subsequent years. They didn't recognize and realize that full 30% loss. What they do is they smooth it in. So they bring in the case, I believe that was on a 30-year amortization back then, but they bring in 1/30th of that loss. Now, the 30 here just happens to be both the 30% loss and the 30-year amortization period. Those are two totally separate things. So the point of it is that 30% loss, what that effectively does when it's amortized over 30 years is it means that we only recognized 1% of that 30% loss in that first year. Then we recognized another 1% of that loss in the second year. On to year 30 into the future, and we will have realized the entire 30% loss from 08 in 2038. So it's going to take us 30 years to work through recognizing the entire loss. The point there, and again, this is a little bit deeper, right? But what I'm trying to get across to you all is that amortization policy has changed, and the 20 years has now come down to, the 30 has now come to 20. And that's a positive thing, in my opinion, because what they're doing is they're decreasing the recognition period from 30 to 20 so that the changes and or the predicted outcomes versus actual outcomes. So expected return, which we call the discount rate, the expected yield on the assets invested in the market, that versus what actually happens to those assets when the year is over and we look at what they actually made. That differential between what we expected or predicted, that discount rate, and what actually was incurred, that difference also is amortized. So we're amortizing it over to a shorter life. So that means the recognition period is quicker, and that's better. You don't want, in my opinion, to kick the can down the road for 30 years. Smoothing is beneficial to local jurisdictions because these big, say that big dip in 07, 08, it allows the jurisdictions to, yes, increase their contributions down to CalPERS to backfill that big loss, but they don't have to do it all in that year, right? They get to kind of walk into that and a little bit more slowly. So for governments, it's a real benefit to smooth, again, because governments are all about near-term financing. What are we going to do over the next year or two? Good managers are long-term. They always are looking long-term, but because of budgeting laws and rules in government, it drives folks that do budgeting to often be short-term minded. And again, I'm not knocking anybody. I'm just describing what I perceive to be the situation. So that's kind of amortization policy in a nutshell. Again, 30 years down to 20. And it's a positive, but we'll talk a moment about some of the agencies, the employers that and or the associations that represent, rural cities or the League of California Cities, and some of their comments to CalPERS board about this amortization policy change. So, but before I do that, I want to describe Steve Wesley. So Steve Wesley is a former California controller, as I described earlier, and CalPERS board member. And he says the following quote, I believe it was a tweet. Quote, "The pension crisis is inching closer by the day. CalPERS just voted to increase the amount cities must pay to the agency." And that would be both cities and counties. "Cities point to possible insolvency if payments keep rising, but CalPERS is near insolvency itself. It may be reform or bailout soon," end quote. So pretty stunning admission and great. I'm glad that he did it, and I'm glad that we're talking about it. We've got to talk about this stuff. We have to address it. We cannot keep kicking the can down the road. So, and math doesn't lie. Math is pretty convincing stuff. So don't forget, this should not be lost on anyone, that not 20 years ago, CalPERS was over 100% funded. So the drop has been precipitous and quick and devastating. And that is really too bad, because what it has manifested as in local government is this ever-increasing cost every year. Every single year, we have often double-digit increases in the amount of money we have to send to CalPERS to afford our public employee pension debt. And what that does, in effect, because this is simply a pie, is we are taking more and more of that pie, that slice, to CalPERS, and less of that pie is available for services to our constituency, which is the purpose of government, right? Especially local government and the intimacy of the local government with the people. That's the best thing about the best form of government is the local government, because you have the most ability to affect change and to have a say in how things go. Well, our local government more and more is having less ability to provide those services, and it's crunching both sides of the river, Yuba Sutter County, and across the state. It's excuse me. Some counties in our state are not CalPERS employers. Bless them. They are what's called 37 Act counties, and like Orange County is an example of that. And we've talked about Orange County in the past. And Orange County, by the way, they have a pension formula for new hires. I believe this is what the Auditor-Controller, Eric Woolery down there told me. I was down there a month or so ago. But 1.65% is their pension formula rate. Mine, which is post-PEPRA and considered low for CalPERS employers, it's 2%. So me, Nate Black, I have a 2%. Most folks have something greater than that, something like 2.7, 3%. Those are, and you use that rate times the years that you were in service, times your salary, and it's the highest salary. So 1.65% is Orange County's, and Orange County's pension situation is much healthier, as you would obviously expect with a lower benefit formula. So I'm just throwing it out there as it's not, CalPERS is not the only alternative. There are others out there, and the difficulty with CalPERS is we're just not seeing a lot of serious change. Some change there is positive. The 30 years to 20 years is positive, but we really need really serious addressing of this issue by CalPERS. And it would be great if they would be a little bit more humble about it and admit that this really is an issue and that we are in I don't want to say crisis mode because you don't want to be too alarmist, but CalPERS needs to use appropriate language and be real, with us, because otherwise they lack credibility to even talk. And as I talked about a few months ago with you all, and I kind of walked through how this all came to be in 1999 and beyond. Don't forget what I think his name is Bill Christ or William Christ, the chairman at the time, said in 1999, economics professor from I think Stanislaus. Very, very scary that they would make such a huge decision to increase the pension formula across the state employees, starting with public safety, but moving on to all state employees, by shutting down their own actuaries and saying we can't do we're basically analysis paralysis. We can't run every scenario to see if this is a good decision. Let's just make the decision. Well, the worst scenario, and even then some, happened. So, no thank you to him. So that's a little bit about the status of our CalPERS situation. I could go on, but I don't want to talk only about negative stuff this morning. And as you can see, it's just me. Andy took a moment away, so I'm here alone this morning, which is the first time ever, and it's great. I love it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and speak with you all again. It's a real pleasure. So I think we're going to jump into commercial, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. We're going to talk a little bit about the children of our community. So I wanted to share with you all that over the last 3 years, I've been participating in a really wonderful program for our children, both in Yuba Sutter, and it's called Junior Achievement. And Junior Achievement, what it is in a nutshell, is it's teaching financial concepts to our young people. And the program it's called Junior Achievement of Sacramento. And I'm going to go ahead and plug the benefactors, the Jeloviches, president of River Valley Community Bank. They really liked this program, and I believe John Jelovich, the president, had great experience with it in San Francisco when he was a little younger, and he really enjoyed it. And they put up seed capital with Junior Achievement of Sacramento to get Junior Achievement in our area. So thank you to the Jeloviches for that. And so we began, or at least my part in it, began about 3 years ago when Junior Achievement got up in this area. And it's just been a wonderful program. The three pillars of Junior Achievement are financial literacy, work readiness, and entrepreneurship. And so from elementary grade, first or second grade is the earliest curriculum or earliest program that we do, and it goes all the way up to, I believe, senior in high school. I've mostly focused on middle school programs in the 3 years I've been doing it, but and most significantly because I wanted to participate at the school where my children go or attend. And so I really enjoy that. This year I'm doing three different 8th grade classes at a couple of different schools in Sutter County, and it's so wonderful. The kids get a lot out of it, and it gets them thinking about things that just don't come across their plate. So significantly, middle school, we're talking about work readiness, and we're trying to get our young people engaged in their own career future and thinking about choices that they make today and how those choices can impact the opportunities, for example, after high school, whether it's a college opportunities, trade school, you name it. But just thinking about various things that they can do now. And look, some students, they are, and I can see it in class, they think about these things even as, 12 or 13-year-old young people. They're thinking about it. The vast majority are not. So this program gets in there and it starts to kind of help them with those concepts, and it's great. And it's not, the teachers are amazing. They're wonderful. But I think sometimes it's nice to have an outsider come in with a unique experience and kind of shake up the standard sort of day for them and get them thinking about something different. So it's really just a wonderful program. It's expanding every year, and a whole lot of folks that I work with in the county have signed up this year. So really exciting. In fact, we've got Junior Achievement program manager from Sacramento coming up next week, Tuesday, to teach a lot of the department heads in Sutter County about the program. So just really, really great program, and I wanted to get the word out and get everybody knowing that we are trying to get to your young people with these financial concepts. What's a credit card versus debit card? Such a basic sort of thing. They should know, or at least have some sense of that. So we teach that. We teach home budgeting. We teach about career clusters and the whole universe of opportunities. I talk in the programs that I do. I always talk about farming and how farming is so central to our community, and how much we appreciate the farmers. Right? They produce most of the GDP for Sutter County, and I don't know Yuba County's economy as well, but I would imagine significantly for Yuba County as well with all the rice. So anyway, that's Junior Achievement in a nutshell. Great program. You can always go to juniorachievementof-sacramento.org to find out more, and I would encourage you to do so. And if you'd like, you can also contribute to Junior Achievement, as it is not free to put these programs on, but it's definitely worthwhile. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit of positive about the pension stuff, and I didn't get to it in the first half hour, so I just wanted to give you all a sense as to what we are doing in Sutter County. Again, I don't know Yuba County, as I don't represent Yuba County, but hopefully Yuba County is doing some of these things similar to us. So one thing that we've talked about in the past is Section 115 Trust, and this is called pension pre-funding. Some people call it pension stabilization fund or pension rate stabilization fund. So what we did about 18 months ago in Sutter County is we brought in a group called PARS, P-A-R-S, and they helped us establish a Section 115 irrevocable trust. So we can set aside money, excess money, and we don't have much of it, believe you me, but we are trying to consistently budget, and we have in the first 2 years, budget whatever we can into that fund. Okay, so, and this irrevocable fund, it is not at CalPERS. And so we have control over how it's invested, and we have control of the timing of those payments when we take them out of the irrevocable, for example, and send them to CalPERS. And so it's a way for us to kind of start building a rainy day fund for these escalating pension costs, and to hopefully be able to get through it. Because what's going to happen is over about the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years, we're going to have significant cash contribution increases that we have to send down to CalPERS. But if we can somehow get through, again, about the next 10 years, we will get over the hump of this unfunded pension liability, again, assuming the market, doesn't fall out of the sky and things like that, assuming some stability in the market. But if so, we get through this hump and we can start having some decreases in those very high cash contributions we have to send down to CalPERS. So getting through that hump is one more reason why starting today to set aside any available money in that Section 115 trust is a benefit. So thank you to the Sutter County Board of Supervisors and the County Administrator's Office for supporting that effort. I think that was very wise. And a couple other things on that. There's also a pension software that we've engaged a group called GovInvest. And we're using their pension software to really blow the doors off this thing. And we want to take a really comprehensive communication to our board to make sure that everybody is on the same page, where we're at, why we're here, where we're going, and and what we can do to mitigate these financial difficulties. So we are going to be using this software to that end. It's a really fantastic software. You can do a lot of different changes to the assumptions and various other kinds of changes. I'm not going to get into it. We don't have time, but that software is helping us understand our debt at a much more granular level, and look forward to working with the county administrator on that and presenting the findings and information from that to the board. And we're going to be doing that probably in the next 2 months. So please stay tuned. Okay, moving on. I wanted to talk a little bit about a really good man. And his name is Clint Curry. Clint Curry is a deputy DA, deputy district attorney with the Sutter County District Attorney's Office. And over the course of this first term that I've been in office, so about the last 3.5 years, I've got to know Clint. And I just want to tell you all that he's a great guy. And the reason why I wanted you to know that he's a great guy is because he's running for DA Yuba County. Very important to get that right. Law enforcement is everything in local government. And the district attorney is a huge component of law enforcement, of justice. So I got to tell you that Clint is not only a great attorney, but he's a great human being. He really is, and I believe he would do an amazing job. So I would really encourage you all to take a look at Clint and to ultimately vote for him if you can, and if you agree with me. So you can find Clint at clintcurry4da.com, Clint Curry, Curry, for da.com. And just as an FYI, he's endorsed already by Yuba County District Attorney current Pat McGrath, also Yuba County current Sheriff Steve Durfer, both of whom are retiring. And so they've already given him their nod, and he is he works in a neighboring county. So those are two really wonderful endorsements. And anyway, so just wanted to get Clint out there. He's a great guy. Please consider voting for him. Please consider contributing to him if you can. On that same note, I wanted, obviously, to let you all know that I am running and seeking re-election for Auditor-Controller for Sutter County. And the filing deadline, so that you're all aware, is March the 9th, unless the incumbent's not running. And in that case, they extend it, I think, maybe another week. So that's not the case for me. March the 9th will be the deadline. And at present, nobody's running against me, which is, kind of nice. But there's another week left for that to change. So, and look, I love competition. So if you want to run. We'll have a great conversation and great debate. So I'm going to kind of jump back into CalPERS for a minute, because we do have a couple of extra minutes here of time, and I didn't do kind of the last bit of this article, which is very compelling stuff, and it's like Dan Walters from the SAC-B is in a way Paul Revere. He's really trying to shake us up and get us to look at this. So I really appreciate Dan Walters and the ongoing. He's a wonderful columnist, and he's just got a great eye for truth, and he's got a lot of guts too. So go way to go, Dan. Anyway, Dan says, quote, "This crisis." Okay, and so we're talking about obviously the CalPERS being 68% funded. You know, the concern that another downturn could take us. And by the way, I crunched the numbers. If we had that 30% drop, and we're at 68% funded currently, what that would mean is we would drop from 68% to about 47. So, not good. And that would be if everybody who is in the know is right, that would be the point of no return. You drop below 50%, and the ability to scoop the water out with the pail becomes impossible. The amount of water going into the boat sinks it. So this crisis, once again, quote, "This crisis will haunt California for many years to come and will be a big headache for the next governor." Then the author of the same article, again, Tyler Durden, CalPERS is near insolvency. He says, unfortunately, Dan Walters' outlook is optimistic, because when crisis really hits, it will be all American taxpayers who are on the hook to bail out the country's insolvent pension funds. So yes, we're only talking about California. Yes, California is the largest pension debt state. I'll just say total debt in the nation by a significant margin. But it will not reside. This call it bankruptcy, call it insolvency. Insolvency means you are no longer able to pay your current liabilities or your debt service. It will not just be a California citizenry problem. This will become an American problem, because California, we believe, would seek some kind of bankruptcy help from the federal government. What is that going to do to California reputationally? What is that going to do to California in terms of our relationship with other states? Imagine being the governor of California and working with other governors, and your state, to the tune of $500 billion, got bailed out by the federal government. I don't think they would be too appreciative of that, having that debt transferred from state to federal, and all the other ramifications that would come about from that. Very, very concerning. So moving on in this bad omen of a quotation from Tyler Durden in this article. So it will be all American taxpayers who are on the hook to bail out the country's insolvent pension funds. It is also then that some of the deepest fissures in U.S. society, and I'll say will manifest, between public and private workers, between taxpayers and benefit recipients, between the young and the old. These will all bubble to the surface at the same time with very violent consequences. So just take a moment and think about that. We're constantly being segregated in our country, and this group versus that group. Well, this pension problem could make that the division, exponentially greater, because you're going to have very, very difficult relationships come to be or form between public sector workers and private sector workers. Private sector workers saying, hey, why do they get all of these things that are unaffordable? We don't get pensions. Most private sector employees would never dream of a pension. It's not offered. Very few private companies these days offer pensions. I think GM showed us how well, and I'm being sarcastic, that might work out. In 2009, recall that bailout, and recall what President Obama did then. He changed the ordering of bankruptcy, which affected, he sided with the unions and raised their position in the bankruptcy so they would get a greater share of whatever assets were divvied up over the bondholders. So I still don't know if that was legal, personally, but nevertheless it occurred. I think first time in American history that kind of a reordering occurred. But I digress. The problem there, though, what I'm getting at is that pensions often don't work. Private sector has been through it, didn't like it, unsustainable, incredibly difficult to afford. If you look at GM or you look at other private companies that have pensions, and especially these high formula pensions, it's such a problem to keep those things sustainable. And you look at their income statement, their ins and outs for any given period, so for the year, and you see an ever increasing amount of their revenues going towards pension costs, which mirrors the public sector's pension morass. With, so for example, Sutter County, we're ever increasing the amount of money we have to set aside for pension costs, which necessarily means we have to take it from elsewhere, from the services we provide. Again, that leads to that concept of service insolvency. So you're no longer able to provide the services that the government was set up to provide. It's a bad situation, and as quote Tyler Durden says here, it could have violent consequences. So all the more reason to talk about it now, to address it now, to resolve this issue now. And to you local jurisdictions out there that haven't, I would highly encourage you to start taking remedial steps. There's not much you can do to get away from CalPERS, but there are things you can do to help mitigate, again, that next 10 years. Especially in the next 10 years with these double-digit increases. And double-digit increases on top of double-digit increases are exponential. Okay, so it's a very difficult thing to afford. So start today. Start setting aside whatever you can. Start being clever. Think outside the box. Figure out where you can cut costs. Even some of the ancillary services that are kind of on the outside of what government was originally set up to do, especially local government. Some of those services maybe should be dropped. Maybe you cut those in order to save public safety, right? Public safety is number one. Always, it must be. And so we have to do whatever we can to provide for public safety and the amazing work that our deputies do, our firemen, our firewomen, our emergency personnel. We've got to protect them at all costs. They're the core of local government. So if I haven't concerned you or worried you enough, I don't think you're listening. This is here. This is real, and it's not impossible to address, but we have to address it. So that's. I'll finish up. That's all I'll say on CalPERS for today. Maybe I'll pick on just for a moment our federal government. We've got a few more minutes, and then we're going to commercial, and Lou will be on after 9. So, federal debt. I wanted to bring in a concept here of risk-free investments, and I think you'll see the reason why. As the federal government continues to grow its debt, at some point, the amount of interest that we're paying on that debt becomes too great as a percentage of our total federal expenditures. In other words, we have to pay our debt service. So all of the trillions that are out there held by private citizens and other countries like China, all of that debt, it has an interest rate affixed to it, right? And the interest rates vary depending on when that debt was originated, in what year, and where the Fed Treasury rate was at the time. So we pay interest on the debt according to those various rates. Well, recently, over the last year, we've increased we've gone away from ZIRP at the Feds, ZIRP being zero interest rate policy, which was in place for some 7-8 years. And they started increasing the Treasury rate, which is positive, right? All those folks that are retired, they have they're living on fixed incomes and or income from their 401k based upon their assets. So they have these things invested often in fixed income assets, and the rates have been so low, their take-home money or their retirement money is really low. So I love to see that rate start climbing up. We shouldn't be penalizing our savers at the to save the people that have debt, the people that over leverage themselves. So anyway, I have to wrap this up quickly, but the concept I want to share here is that as that interest charge continues to increase, both because our interest rates themselves, beginning with the federal rate, that's increasing, albeit slowly, and then second, just the debt itself is increasing, the total debt. So that's creating a push on the interest, the amount of interest cash that we're paying out every year, and that's going up and up and up. At some point, we have a problem, and we can no longer afford that interest, or we have to significantly cut elsewhere in our government. Well, we assume in finance across the country, private sector, public sector, we all know that federal treasuries are, we call them risk-free from default. They'll never default. What I'm telling you today is that the amount of interest that we're looking to pay in the future and that affordability or lack thereof of that interest, it could lead us to actually default. Yes, we print our own money, but at what point have we debased the currency so much that printing money is no longer effective? Think Argentina, okay? So anyways, hate to leave it on a bad note, but at the same time, this is important stuff, and I really appreciate you all tuning in this morning. It's good to be back and talk with you, and again, I'm Sutter County Auditor-Controller. You can find me at 530-822-7127. That's the phone number to the office, 530-822-7127. I look forward to being with you again sometime in the near future, and have a great weekend, y'all.